It's FlamesNation Radio. I'm Ryan Pike, joined as always by Shane Stevenson, and this is a special edition of FlamesNation Radio delivered by DoorDash and by the fine folks at Eau Claire Distillery, the makers of Rupert's Whiskey, the official whiskey of the Calgary Flames. It's draft season, folks. We're 3 weeks away from the 2022 National Hockey League entry draft as we record this, and we figured since it's draft season, we might as well bring in Daily Faceoff's prospects and draft expert, Chris Peters. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing well, Ryan. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Pleasure to join you guys. Pleasure to be talking about the draft, even though, man, the Flames just don't have a ton of draft picks, do they? But you know what? It's still every year, these guys, it's still worth learning about because you never know when they're going to be traded or when they're going to be available as free agency. So following these guys now, you really get to see their whole kind of track. And that's one of the fun things about what I get to do is I get to watch these guys begin their NHL journeys and just follow them the rest of the way. So it's a lot of fun on that front, but yeah, it'll be a fun year for sure.
Well, so as you mentioned, the Calgary Flames have 3 draft picks in this year's draft. They had more picks, and then they traded a bunch of them away. They traded their first round pick for 2 more years of Tyler Toffoli. They traded one of their thirds for Nikita Zadorov. They traded another third for I believe that was Dan Vladar. I think at this point now, and Shane, jump in if I'm missing a pick, they have a 5th, a 2nd, and a 7th.
They have 3 picks.
So
I imagine Brad does what Brad usually does and finds a way to find more, but he can't move from like 20 to 23 and gain a 3rd round pick this year. He'd be picking up 6th or 5th of scraps here and moving down 2 or 3 picks.
So Chris, we've been fortunate enough in the Calgary market to be in a playoff bubble, for lack of a better term, for much of the season. In years when the team is not particularly good, we are much more aware of how good or bad the draft class is, but we apologize. We've been watching a lot of hockey that's been meaningful, thankfully. And, outside of seeing, a bit of the Seattle Thunderbirds WHL playoff run and, some OHL games here and there, we haven't watched a lot of this year's draft class. So what can you tell us about, I guess, the nature of talent at this year's draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a very general sense, the top of the draft is, as you may have heard, is below average, compared to what we've had in the last few years. Shane Wright, while is largely number one for most people, there's been a lot more doubt raised over him, which, is usually, it can be a good thing. It can be a good thing in a draft. But this year, I think it's just kind of that, nobody really sees the number one pick from him. So he didn't really play like a number one. Nobody else really did either. I had Logan Cooley number one on my board at the end. I know, like, my friend Corey Pryman at The Athletic had Uri Slavkovsky. I know that, there have been a lot of different opinions. So that means that the very top of the draft is not amazing. I think once you get kind of past that and in the first to late first, it's more of an even average draft. And then, to me, there are a lot fewer players in this draft than a normal year where I feel super strongly or passionate about players beyond the first round. I think there's a lot of guys where it's like, I like this player, but something wrong here or there, or something I don't love here or there, that causes me to have pause. And, so it's a weird year. I think in a lot of fronts, we're still dealing with the effects of COVID with, a lost season in the OHL last year, a shortened season in the WHL, disrupted seasons throughout, and not having players that just haven't been on the normal development track, which you have to take into account with this class. So that's part of the challenge that I think exists in this current year, and why I think that a lot of us are like, the class is okay. It's not amazing. It's not, it's probably average, not too far, below in some aspects, and just your average draft in a lot of other aspects.
If you were an NHL general manager and you had to pick a draft to only have 3 picks in, is this the worst draft in the world to have fewer in compare? Because I know we've been, Shane and I have been talking about, we've been hearing, about Connor Bedard for years. We've been hearing about a lot of good Western League players in the 23 class. Is this the kind of year where if fans are a little bit down on, say, the Flames only having 3 picks, is this the kind of year you're going, yeah, but they still have a lot of picks next year?
Yeah, I think my initial thought, as you were asking the question, my initial thought was like, yeah, it's not bad, but I think in general, you want to have as many bullets as you can, or as many darts to throw at the dartboard, if you will. And I think that any year you can hit on somebody. I mean, there's a good chance, and I wouldn't say a good chance, but there's a chance that whoever they pick with their second round pick is, a top prospect for them in a few years down the road. We just don't know. There's so many unknowns about this class, and there's not a lot of consensus either. So you don't know exactly who's going to be there. So there could be somebody that's, in the top 30 on my board or top 35 on my board that's still there at 59, so like that's the thing that you kind of wonder about with these draft classes as they are. But I think in general though, like, there aren't as many guys where you say, oh, we missed our shot at him or we missed our shot at that guy. There's a lot of good WHL players this year. There are going to be quite a few next year as well. And of course you mentioned it starts with Connor Bedard, and I think every team wants to have their first round pick next year. So in case things really go south, just lean right into that. Just lean into the bad and get Connor Bedard. There's talk already that the Boston Bruins, with all of their injuries, might as well just go into tank mode, get Connor Bedard, and call it good. But there's no guarantee to getting the number 1 overall pick, even if you have the worst record. But I think there are going to be a lot of teams that explore that option this season, because Connor Bedard is that player for a lot of people. Is he Connor McDavid level? No, but he is an exceptional player and certainly a lot better than anything that we have in this class.
Wouldn't hurt to get second though next year, don't you think?
Well, true. Yeah, true. That's the interesting thing is you've got a number of players at the top of next year's draft that are legit talents. You've got, Bedard, you've got Matvei Michkov, who might be one of the most offensively gifted players and smartest offensive players I've ever seen in my life. And then you've also got, other guys like Adam Fantilli, Charlie Stramel, a number of European players that have really stepped out in the last year here that are going to be really good. So there's a lot to look forward to in next year's draft. It's just, you never really can bank on where you're going to pick a year out because we just don't know how the season's going to go. We don't know, obviously a team like the Flames, there are so many offseason questions that have to be answered before they can really even think about, next season alone. So it'll be interesting, but next year is the year. If you're going to be bad, next year is the year to be bad. It's not enough to tank. You have to tank in the right year too. And this was not the right year to tank.
So that's next year, obviously. This year, if we focus back on that, like I said, Calgary's late second round pick is their first pick right now. Chris, who do you see possibly going down there and being available? A couple names or something that maybe fans could look up ahead of time and look up and maybe get excited about?
Yeah, it's always tough. It's tough to say because once you get outside of that first 20 to 25 picks, you lose any sense of consensus. And so it's hard to predict who's going to be there. So I'll just give you a couple of names that were on my board in that range. Doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be there, but there's some names to at least consider. At like 58 on my board, I have Julian Lutz, who is a talented, big scoring winger from Germany. Didn't play in a ton of games this year, but he looks the part. Like it's like, get this guy some development, give him some time to build strength. He played in the German Pro League this year and then looked pretty good at the under 18 Worlds. I thought I wanted a little bit more from him, although Germany really struggled, but he was a guy that I thought was very interesting there. Another guy that I like in that range, Devin Kaplan, who I have at 59th on my board. He's at the U.S. National Team Development Program. There are games where you watch him and you say the skill level that he has, the plays that he can make, looks like a first-round talent to me. He just doesn't do it consistently enough yet, and I think there's some issues. There's some thought maybe it's a hockey sense thing, maybe it's just effort level. Can we get him to be a little bit more consistent this way or that way? And that's an interesting guy. Again, we're talking both of those are big wingers, guys that have size that can make plays. I mean, the thing about both of them is they very well could be gone by then. They're a little lower on my board because I have some thoughts about their overall upside. But I think those are interesting guys to kind of look at. You start to wonder, is there a guy like a Ty Nelson who's an undersized defenseman but very offensively gifted, playing in North Bay, a former number 1 overall pick in the OHL? I think that his draft stock kind of dropped a bit this year. He put up really good numbers, but there are a lot of defensive deficiencies in his game. There are things that he's going to need to clean up, but you say, okay, well, I really like those tools. Another defenseman to kind of keep an eye on, Elias Selimanson, who came into the year considered as a first-round caliber guy. The offense hasn't been there. He's much more, defensive, but he's got good size and mobility. And so you say, okay, well, there's some upside. Is it likely he's there that late? No. I mean, I have him kind of low on my board, 66th on my own rankings. And so that's where you say, okay, well, is that a guy that we could realistically get in that range? It's tough to say. But it's going to be tough to say for all these. I mean, I have guys that I'm lower on than NHL teams. It just takes one team to change the entire structure of a draft board in terms of who's available. If you're like pie in the sky and really hopeful, maybe you get a Mikko Matika, who is a bigger player, doesn't have great foot speed. A guy like that, you're looking at players that have some flaws, right? You're looking at guys that they're obviously not going to be perfect players. But he's an interesting one. Maverick Lamoureux, super big, not a lot of offense, needs some work on the hockey sense, but he's a 6'7" defenseman, and has really good mobility at that size. So you're saying, okay, well, is that guys like that tend to go a little bit higher regardless of what happens, just because of the size profile. But that's just a handful of names. So, I mean, and the good thing is on Daily Faceoff, the rankings are free. So you can go check it out. You can look at the names. I would say, look at the names from, no joke, 35 all the way down to 70, because you're probably going to get somebody in that range. But it's really tough to say. That's kind of where I'm at with. That's how big the gaps can be in this draft and why I think there's still talent to be mined in that range.
The thing I always find super interesting in drafts where the teams don't have a lot of bullets, as you said, or a lot of darts. The Flames have tended to go, for ceiling and for, areas where they feel comfortable in recent years. They have, if you look at their assistant heads of amateur scouting are their former WHL and OHL area scouts. They tend to do a lot of business in Sweden. They haven't had the kind of success, I think, with some of their Swedish picks in recent years, but, I think it's sort of a comfort zone for them. In the Western League, I know we mentioned that, watching a lot of T-Birds hockey recently, a couple Kamloops Blazers players are on your list, sort of in the vicinity of where the Flames pick, Mats Lindgren and Fraser Minton. What are those two players like? Because I know the Flames have, they went to the Blazers with Connor Zary in 2020. They have long ties to the area through Jerome McGinley, and it seems if you're talking about Flamesy picks, one of the two Blazers feels kind of Flamesy to me.
Yeah, I think they both do, really, because you look at, so Minton really came on strong, I think, in the playoffs. That was really where, I started to see more of the tools that make sense to me for him to be, an impact guy. I think his skating is only okay. That's probably one of the areas where he needs to improve. He has a really good shot. He has a good nose for the net, and he gets to the middle. And I think, you need guys that have that kind of hard-nosed, I'll get inside pressure. There are plenty of guys in this draft where you see him start floating to the perimeter and you're like, that's not going to fly. And that's certainly not going to fly for a team like the Flames. Like, that's not a guy that they're going to get. As far as Lindgren goes, I think he moves pucks really effectively. I think he's also, the fact that he's really young, he's young for the class, an August birthday. But he played big minutes for a team that went on a deep run, and he was relied upon, and he has good footwork. He defends well, so certainly that's a guy where you say, oh yeah, I could definitely see either one of those guys. And I think there's a good chance that either one of them are there too. So I think those are good guys to call out for sure.
And I think Shane and I both have a U.S. national development player we're kind of curious about, guys that might fall. Shane, you go with yours first.
A really small defenseman, but he put up tons of points. But again, 5'8", Lane Hutson, really offensively gifted, not something unlike Jeremy Poirier, who the Flames took a few years ago. When you only have one pick in the top 100, you really kind of want to make it hit. And I'm a big componenter of not only just watching, but using statisticals. And he grades out fantastically. I just wanted to know if what your thoughts on Lane Hutson were.
Well, Lane Hutson is one of my personal favorites in this draft class. Like, full stop. I've said it all year long. The thing that I like about Lane is that despite the size, he is a competitive SOB. I mean, he does not quit on a single play, does not quit on a puck. No joke. I keep saying this, and people, they can't believe that a small defenseman would have this capability. But I think Lane Hutson has the best defensive stick in the draft. I think his stick checking, how he places his stick, his anticipation, the way that he closes on opposing forwards, he uses what's available to him. And that's not his size. It's his intelligence, it's his skating, and it's that stick. And he really does a good job of getting in the way defensively. I think he is a true two-way defenseman. Now, is he going to win the board battles? Is he going to win the battles in the net front? No. But is he going to be able to get pucks out of the zone? Is he going to be able to get pucks up the ice? Is he going to be a factor and a threat in the offensive zone? Yes, to all of those things. He's got incredible footwork. I have him as a first-round talent. I know that there are going to be teams that are that he is not even on their board. They're not even going to consider him. And that is where you start seeing, okay, I have him as a first round pick. I think that I'm very much in the minority in terms of what the scouting community is going to say. So he has home run potential in the second round. If you're the team that gets him, I don't think he's going to last long enough to be there, quite frankly, because I think enough teams like him. They just don't like him as a first rounder. And like I said, there are some teams that'll just say no way. But you look at there's a chance, he's seen an endocrinologist to say, hey, what, developmentally, if you even just look at Lane Hutson, you say that is a small child. That is not an elite hockey player. You know who it reminds me of physically?
Maybe a guy that we're all
maybe a guy
about.
that you guys are pretty familiar with. Like legitimately, I mean, how many stories have you heard about Johnny Goudreau where they thought he was the stick boy for whatever junior team he was going to be playing for?
I'll tell you what. It is draft year. Goudreau got picked, and people on message boards are like, USHL, what the hell is that? And then he came to development camp, and Alex Ruiz, who at the time was for Flames TV, was doing reporting, and so they did a stand up with Goudreau, and the person holding the microphone literally towered over Johnny Goudreau.
Yeah,
and now here we are. So
yeah. I mean, that's so. The other thing is that Lane has been told by this endocrinologist that he has, more room to grow, that he will continue to grow. And if he's the thing is if he's 5'10", we're not having this conversation because then he'd be Denton Matejchuk is not much bigger at that point. And he's a guy that a lot of people would say, hey, that's a top 20 pick. So that's kind of where you start saying, okay, well, his size matters for a defenseman way more than it matters for a forward. They're going to be out there more. They're going to be playing against the various, their matchups matter. It just does. It simply does. But I think his best case, I think Lane Hutson's best case scenario is that he's a Quinn Hughes style defenseman where it's more on angles and getting under players and beating them to pucks and retrieving with skill and making sure that you're retrieving and becoming very dangerous with the puck right away, which is something I think Quinn does exceptionally well. So that's, and really, I mean, you look at Lane Hutson's numbers and they're very comparable or better than Quinn Hughes. And, the other thing too is, I don't use plus minus in scouting, but I wanted to share this because Pete Krupski, who does the broadcasting for the NTDP, sent me a question for my podcast about Lane and dropped the note that he was a plus 82 in his career at the NTDP. And that's a team where in the first year, they lose a lot of games to the USHL teams. They're overmatched physically in a lot of those games. And then there's, the next year you're playing against colleges. And I'm telling you what, this guy makes so many darn plays that, I can't help but root for him. You try to be as unbiased as you possibly can. And I know the probability of him making the NHL and being an effective player at his size is low. I just think he's going to do it. That's just my opinion.
Your description of him and how he uses his stick reminds me tons of Ryan Ellis. So
for sure,
size wise too, even if he said he gets that extra couple inches, then that just your description of smart with the stick and just smart with the placement of the pucks. That's just what it. I like Quinn Hughes one too, but that really just made me think of Ryan Ellis.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think that Quinn Hughes is certainly the easy comp because he's NTDP guy and small and all that other stuff, and a lot of doubts about him. But I'd say that he's at this point a better defender than Quinn was at that time. So that's pretty solid.
Right, another U.S. national development kid, Cruz Lucius, who I know he missed some time. The last name probably sounds familiar to some draft honks because he has a brother who got drafted fairly recently. What's the deal with Cruz Lucius, and could there be value for the Flames potentially with him in the second round?
Absolutely, certainly could be there. I think that he, having missed as much time as he did, I only got to see him live really at the World Under 18s this year. And he played well there. I thought it was a great last impression. He played, he was strong on pucks. He showed skill, really great release. He's not as dynamic as his older brother is. And so it's always tough when those poor guys that come in have the older brother that goes in the first round, everybody's comparing them. I think he's thicker than his brother though. Like he's got a little bit more strength on puck. He's got a little bit more strength in general, and that matters. And so I think that he's a guy that certainly, it's at least possible that he's going to be there at 59, and a guy that, I think would be an effective pick in that range as well. As far as, where I have him, I have him pretty much really near that range at 65th on my board. And, he is, I think he has a chance to really excel. I think if he was healthy for most of the year, and if I got more looks at him, I think I'd feel a little bit more confident where I have him. And he might've been a little bit higher, but I mean, certainly that's a guy there where there's upside, and he might slip just because there wasn't that big of a book on him, or as big of a book on him this year as there could have been.
All right, we got the preamble out of the way. Flames fans, second rounders, been there, done that. The Flames, for some reason, have just hit on these 6th and 7th rounders. Matthew Phillips, Rory Cairns, Jack Beck, Andrew Mangiapane, Dustin Wolf, the reigning American Hockey League goaltender of the year. I don't know how they do it. They just have a lot of really good, big trust in their area scouts. The Flames have a 5th rounder this year at, I believe, at 155, and a 7th rounder currently at 219. So who do you like? We won't put you on the spot with which players should the Flames take at 219, because goodness knows, I don't think the Flames know who they want to take at 219. But are there any players you think for one reason or another might be, candidates to fall a bit on draft weekend, and are some players that the Flames could potentially go, ooh, smallish goalie, why not? Or ooh, hasn't played a lot this year but has a high ceiling, why not? Because that seems to be their MO the last few years: smallish offensive guys and guys coming off of weird injuries who end up just exploding offensively the next season.
Yeah, it's so tough to say, but every year I do like draft sleepers, and my piece on the draft just came out on the sleepers earlier this week. And the guys that I have in there, let's start with the undersized goalie right away, because there's Hugo Havilland, the 5'10" goalie from Sweden who won the gold medal at the World Under 18s. Absolutely stoned USA in that game, and just he was, they don't win the gold medal without him playing as well as he did. But he's a 5'10" goalie, and most teams aren't going to touch a player unless they're 6'2" or taller. Dustin Wolf, very almost, very close to not getting drafted at all. Luckily for him, and luckily now for the Flames, he's shown a great ability so far in both junior and now extending that into pro. So he continues to prove anybody that doubted him for his size. You look at UC Saros, obviously he's the unicorn of the under 6 foot goaltender, the 5'10" goalie. I don't think Havilland is of that quality, and Saros actually went in the 4th round, which, at his size is kind of a minor miracle. I think Haviland's one of those guys that could absolutely be there late. I just think that there's a lot to like in terms of what he's able to do. If there's a guy that I would say that is kind of in the mold of players that the Flames have targeted over the years, I think it would make sense to also look at overage players, or guys that are 2nd or 3rd year eligible players. One guy that I think kind of is in the mold that, he could probably play in a lot of different spots in your lineup is a guy named Connor Kurth, who played for the Dubuque Fighting Saints this year. Decent, he's not a big guy physically, but he's very strong. He's strong on the pucks. He's got a really good shot. He's going to the University of Minnesota. So it's a guy that not only these later round picks, you draft those guys, and if you draft them out of Europe or the NCAA, you get a little bit of a longer runway in terms of how long you have their rights. So you don't have to make the decisions as quickly. And so you're seeing a lot more teams use later picks on college-bound or European players because that gives them a little more time to work with that player, and they don't have to sign that player for some time. And so that gives you flexibility within your yearly 50 contracts that you can sign as well. So that's why guys like Kurth, who had a really impressive season in the USHL this year at 81 points in 62 games, this is a pretty good player who I thought should have been drafted last year. I liked him then. I didn't love him. I didn't have him like as a super high pick or anything. He was one of those guys I was like, if the team gets him late, they're going to get some good value. Now he's got a year of excellent production. So that's another guy, that's the kind of guys you're looking at there. Some of the other players, there's like Cole Knuble from the Fargo Force in the USHL, another college-bound guy. He's going to play another year of junior before he moves on to college. He's committed to go to the University of Notre Dame. He is Mike Knubel's son. Mike Knuble was a massive forward. Cole Knuble is not massive at this point in time. Maybe he'll grow, but Mike played at like 6'3", 215 or whatever. And Cole is, I believe, 5'10". So, it's interesting how genetics work sometimes. But he did have 49 points in 62 games this year. In his first year in the USHL, he went from AAA hockey to the USHL, which is a significant jump. He managed it extremely well. I think that there's a lot of upside in Cole Knuble, especially given that he's got time to go. Some of the other guys, and you say, okay, well, why not take a shot on a smaller guy, Zam Plant, he's Derek Plant's son, who played for the Buffalo Sabres. Played primarily in high school this year, but also played for the Chicago Steel and is expected to play for the Steel for the rest of the year. And Ryan, I see you kind of tilted your head there. The Chicago Steel, they've been the USHL's factory of NHL draft picks and of top quality players. We're talking about Owen Power, Brendan Brisson, just a number of other Matthew Coronado. Excuse me. Where did I not lead with that? Bury the lead, Chris. So you got Matthew Coronado. So, but Plant is expected to play there for most of next season. I think he's the kind of player that will be there in the 5th, maybe the 7th. I don't know if he'll be, I think he's well known enough that he'll be picked, but he's got a lot of skill and talent. So, that's a guy where you say, okay, well, there's something there. Or you can, that's an upside pick. Or you can go in a completely different direction and say, I would like a brute force defenseman that just hits everything, that plays with aggression, and that, maybe this is a guy that I don't even know if he's going to get drafted, but I watched him at the under 18 Worlds. I've seen him before, and I watched him again at the under 18 Worlds. And I was just like, every time this guy is on the ice, if you don't have your head up, you are going to get absolutely smoked. And if you do have your head up, you're going to get absolutely smoked because he's just that much bigger and wants to hit you. And so sometimes guys like that show little glimpses of something. It's not just the physical play. I think he's got really good mobility and he moves pucks at an adequate level. He's not a super offensive guy, but when you see a guy that I have to be aware of him on the ice, or the other team has to be aware that he's on the ice, that says a lot to me. And to me, he played big minutes there. He was effective. It wasn't, they were clean body checks as well. He wasn't headhunting. And he was hitting to dispossess players of the puck, but also hitting, with some intimidation factor behind it. And as we've seen in these playoffs, that still can matter. So that is something that can change the dynamic of a game. And so a guy like that, and that's Ryan Bedahar, who played for the Swift Current Broncos. Did I not say his name until just now?
Yeah, that's what I was like. I was like, I don't know who you're talking about right now, but I'm loving it.
That is amazing. Yeah. So sorry to Ryan Bedahar, who is a 6'2", 200-pound defenseman who hits people very hard. But that's another guy where it's like, I wouldn't touch him until the 5th, 6th, or 7th round at the early, like the 7th round is probably where I would put a player like him, because there's limited offensive upside, but it's like, but I see something. And those are the guys that you think about.
And organizationally, I mean, we were looking at the Stockton Heat just went on a very nice playoff run that just ended earlier this week. If you look at the guys they have in that system, I mean, the Flames have Connor Mackey, who's probably graduating the NHL very soon. They have Yusuf Valimaki, who goodness knows what happens with him. But beyond those two guys, they have Kuznetsov and Poirier, who are they're developing, and then the bench gets pretty clear after that. I mean, maybe Jake Boltman. So I could see easily the Flames seeing, they tend to, like a lot of teams do, the way it was described to me by some of the Flame scouts, they draft like they're inviting people to a party, and they try to have a bunch of different types of players in their system at any given time, because you don't know what you're going to need, and you don't really know how the game's going to develop or how those games are going to change from year to year. So you don't want to have to stock up on a bunch of one thing and then have to pivot. So that's a lot of food for thought, Chris. Shane, do you have any other questions for our guest?
We not really haven't talked about the top end of the draft, because the Calgary obviously doesn't have any picks, but just your personal in the top 20, Chris, just for your own sake, who in there do you absolutely think someone could get away with and just run away with them? Like, just be absolutely ecstatic that they get them a little lower, maybe. Like, I'm not talking 1-2, maybe in the 10 to 25 range. Who there do you think in your own mind is just someone that could run away and turn into someone really good?
I think that the guy who has the biggest star potential outside of the first three guys that, the Cooley, Wright, Slavkovsky group, is Frank Nazar from the National Team Development Program. He is smaller. He's 5'10". He is a center. He is blazing fast. I mean, sneaky fast. And it's just, he's got some explosiveness to him. He plays really smart hockey. He's got a good release. He plays hard. He's defensively responsible. I mean, there's a lot to like about him, and about his, just his entire package of skills. The only thing that you really wouldn't like about him is the size, and that, I think that's why he could slip. I have him 7th on my board. I think that's aggressive. It's just speaks to how much I like the player. I think there's a good chance that he's going to be available in that 10 to 15 to 10 to 20 range. And I think whoever gets him in that range is going to, like you said, be ecstatic. They're going to say, we have a player that has the potential to be a star in this league if everything goes right, if we stay on his development. He's currently committed to the University of Michigan. So they've obviously had a lot of success with a lot of top end players. He's the guy that really, I think, intrigues me the most outside of that top three. I think you could say the same things about, Denton Matejchuk, as well as a guy that I think is lower on some boards that I think has a chance to be a pretty special defenseman. And it wouldn't shock me if we look back someday and say, oh, wow, how did this guy go after Juracek and Nemec and all that? And I think at this point, there's no question in my mind that Nemec and Juracek are the best two defensemen in this draft coming into this. But I could absolutely see a couple guys having their development take off and overtake them. But Nazar is going to be the pick for the guy that really, I think, has that boom potential outside of the top picks.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
I think that's all we got for you, man. Let's get some plugs in. Chris Peters, if anyone hasn't been following him, follow him on Twitter at Chris M. Peters. He obviously very plugged in. I've followed his work since the United States of Hockey days back in the day, and we're still pestering him with questions all these many years after. He's a big part of our team over at Daily Faceoff. So follow his draft and prospect analysis right now and throughout the year at dailyfaceoff.com. He also has a Substack where I believe he still does his podcast at Hockey Sense. It's a good podcast. It's Chris is just quality content the whole year round. And of course, after Chris goes into a hole and has a nap for 2 weeks after the draft, then he'll have to wake up and do a lot more work, because then there's the U18s and there's the World Juniors in August. And then before you know it, European and college hockey gets going. So I hope, Chris, for your sake, I hope you get a chance to take a break and recharge, because we work you to death.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a family vacation in late July, and then I'm going to come back, and it is going to be Hlinka Gretzky Cup time. So it's like, what is summer in the prospect world? I've never heard of it.
You want the draft to go back to mid-June?
Yeah, I cannot wait for it to go back to mid-June, and I cannot wait for the World Juniors to not be in August ever again. So
yeah, because usually our friend of the program, Peter Labardius, over at Sportsnet, he's tied into everything that Hockey Canada does. And we were joking at the Flames decompression day when they did all their press conferences that, this is gonna be like the shortest summer ever. So hopefully everyone, all of our hockey friends, everyone who wants to learn about the game, we appreciate you, and we're glad you're gonna have so much content over the next however long. For everyone else who's making the content, we hope you're managed to stay hydrated and sneak in a nap and maybe a vacation. I'm going to Disneyland the week before training camp opens, and then it's basically going to be a sprint from mid-September all the way. But that's why we do it. It's fun. It beats getting a real job.
That is 100% true.
Awesome. So this has been FlamesNation Radio. I'm Ryan. He's Shane. He's Chris Peters. Follow him on Twitter, again, at Chris M. Peters. We're delivered to you by DoorDash, as always, and by the wonderful folks at Eau Claire Distillery, makers of the official whiskey of the Calgary Flames, Rupert's Whiskey. That'll be it for this edition. We'll see you guys in a week as we get ever so closer to the NHL Draft and the beginning of free agency. Take care.